First, do you have any count of how many people are being affected by this law? It seems to vary from place to place.
We know the number of Tier 3 offenders who are listed on the Department of Correction website, which is a few hundred. And that's really all we can rely on.
So it seems that departments are measuring 1,000 foot, differently from town to town. Providence.
Oh, how many are affected? I'm sorry.
Yeah, how many are
yeah.
specifically into this law, if you have any idea?
In fact, we don't have the exact number, but in
Okay.
terms of different measurements, there's no question police departments are measuring it differently, and so is in probation and parole. They all have different software and measurement abilities, and you will get different readings depending upon what software is utilized and how the distance is gauged.
We've had, yes, there have been individuals we've talked to who have initially been told by probation and parole, it looks like they're safe, they don't have to move, and then the police department comes to them and says, no, we've run the figures, you have to move, you're within 1,000 feet. So it really is an absurd situation, and it gets to the vagueness issue that John talked about.
Part of the complaint as well, there's no way for someone subjected to this law to contest these facts either, short of being arrested and arguing them after enduring felony prosecution or probation violation as to what exactly constitutes a school. It's not a simple definition, public or private. Well, in this case, certain daycare facilities that offer pre-kindergarten are being considered a school by certain departments, while others are not. And then how expansive that definition gets is also problematic, because we've just begun the enforcement stage of this in the last few months.
I also want, one other point I want to follow up on has to do with the irrationality of the law. Many people may not understand what does it mean to be a level 3 sex offender, who is actually affected by this, to keep them away from schools. So it's important to note that level 3 offenders who are affected by this law include people whose only crime involved adults. The vast majority, I think everybody recognizes that the vast majority of sex offenses are perpetrated by people who know the victim. So this idea of strangers hanging around schools is just a myth. And this law feeds into that myth. And also, this bans people from residing within 1,000 feet of the school. They can travel around the school, they can hang around schools, they just can't live at night when they're probably least dangerous. That's what this law gets at. And then when you hear the explanations of who is and who is not covered, so if you have a daycare facility that has pre-K classes, they can't live there. If it doesn't have pre-K classes, you can live there. It makes absolutely no sense, but it's having this enormous adverse impact for no good reason.
There's a lot of focus here on the homelessness aspect of it, but these are just referring to the person who's living out in Motel 6. This is someone who already had housing. Why can't they just find a new apartment or a new house in a new location?
First, it's causing a lot of homelessness because just picking up and leaving, especially in the short time frame that many of these guys have been given, is virtually impossible for someone who has no barriers, never mind a sex offense barrier, and living within 1,000 feet. And if you look at the proximity limits, if you start drawing 1,000 feet around all the schools in the state, you start to get into very, very small pockets of habitability for folks. So it's finding the small pockets, it's finding affordable options within those small pockets, and then finding a place that you can actually afford to move into. So when you think about all those factors, that's why folks are falling into homelessness and going to Jean's shelter. And then Jean can speak to the barriers. Those barriers will now exist at trying to get them out of the shelter. They've always existed, but now the areas that people can go to have now shrunk even further. So it causes almost an impossible hurdle to overcome to get folks back into the community.
I think also, I would say that in addition to that, there are, if you can find a landlord that'd be willing to rent to somebody who's a sex offender, most property owners do background checks, do credit checks. So what we're running into is, a lot of people, the people that we work with are looking for housing, are running into those barriers as well. Even, subsidized housing, we're in our organization that owns housing, but we can't rent to sex offenders because, we basically are funded through HUD and there's prohibitions against renting to sex offenders. So we can't even help our own population, which is very difficult.
And I imagine your building's not within 1,000 feet of the school?
No, we're on the grounds of the Pastore complex, so we're kind of in the middle of all of the state departments that are housed there, and Department of Corrections is also right there. It's actually, I think, a better place if you're going to have to house a large group of people in one place. I mean, it's very safe there. Neighbors have had concerns in the past because they get notifications whenever a level 2 or level 3 sex offender is registered for Harrington Hall. But in the 6 years that we've run this program, we've never had an issue with not one person reoffending or being seen in a place where they shouldn't be. For the most part, the people who come to Harrington Hall are very appreciative just to have a place to lay their head at night, and we provide comprehensive social services to get people out of the shelter and into housing. But as Sol said, it's very difficult. It's very difficult anyway to find affordable housing. It's difficult for people who do not have income to be able to get any kind of housing, and if they have any kind of an offense, then there are limits to the kind of subsidized housing that they're allowed to go into. So you have a person who nobody wants to give you a job, nobody wants you in their building because you have to tell them and they have to register. And what are they supposed to do? I mean, it's not impossible, but it takes time. But with this new law, it does become almost impossible, especially because the more affordable places to rent are in more of the urban areas where there's a lot more likelihood that you are going to run into a school in the neighborhood. So it makes it extremely difficult for these men to be able to find a place to live. And we do all we can to help them, but it's a slow process. And it is not a process that is being helped by discharge planning and by corrections. People are told by their probation officers or by their discharge planners, you have to go to Harrington Hall and you have to register.
Just for your information, the suit has been filed, so.
Okay.
Just as a quick follow-up, one of the plaintiffs in question has attempted to find alternative housing, has done so on 2 separate occasions, and both times the police department indicated he was within 1,000 feet of another school. And that, again, goes to the issue of the problem of finding alternative housing.
I have a follow-up question. Now, the ACLU filed a similar lawsuit a couple of years ago and lost with the Superior Court. How is this going to be different?
If I may, that was a temporary restraining order filed in the Superior Court.
Okay.
This is a 1983 civil rights action filed in federal court.
Okay.
And so it's fundamentally different, even though at the initial stage we're requesting a restraining order as well. Fundamentally, it's a different type of complaint and a different proceeding, and certainly a different venue.
Are you aware of any other individuals other than the named plaintiffs?
Oh yes, the dozens. And this is the other thing that's different is this is a class action lawsuit. It's designed to represent all the individuals who are in the position of the named plaintiffs facing homelessness or other barriers to housing. And one of the issues that arose in the earlier lawsuit, it was not a class action. After the temporary restraining order was denied, the plaintiffs were just fearful of continuing with the lawsuit, of being arrested and charged, so we were essentially forced to drop the suit. So that this changes that. We will be able to proceed, and we're hopeful for a favorable result.
So dozens of people have been forced to
Yes, we have heard from dozens of people. We have the individuals who are named in the complaint are representing many others we have talked to who are facing very similar problems.
There's about 30 or so people who were told by the Providence police that they have to move by November 2nd, so that's what you're referring to with Monday. Now, I was told that unofficially there's a limit in how many sex offenders that you can have at Harrington Hall. Is that true? And if so, how are you dealing with it?
Hold on.
Yes, originally when we took over the shelter in 2009, we met with Cranston officials and with the Neighborhood Watch Group. They were very concerned at that time because a large group of offenders from the urban league had been sent to Harrington Hall, so they were all notified at once. At that time, we were told that we could have up to 5 sex offenders that were registering. And over the course of the years, we've sometimes been under that, sometimes been over that. But starting last spring, we started to see more and more folks coming. And again, we are the shelter of last resort. What we did do, excuse me, originally, when we started to have more folks come, we were telling them, and it was summertime, that they couldn't come and that they should call the state and tell them there was no place else for them to go. Nothing happened with that. Matter of fact, Cranston Police and Parole said they preferred them to be with us because at least they know where they were every night, because people come in, they sign in at night, they sign out in the morning. So as soon as the weather started to change, we lifted our little temporary ban. We hoped that it would actually show the state that there was a need to have at least some kind of housing for these gentlemen, if not at Harrington Hall, that they do something to provide some safe place for them to go. But nothing happened, nothing came of that. And so we've just continued to take more folks. As I said, people are being told, well, you have to leave where you're staying now, you have to go to Harrington Hall.
So how many of the folks that you had the other night were sex offenders, any idea? Or level 3s?
The last count that I had specifically was that, and it came also with parole's count, is that there are about 44 2s and 3s.
Any other questions?
Yeah, just another follow-up. So obviously, Speaker Mattiello has been getting a lot of pressure because of the sex offender showing up at Harrington Hall, and he has asked, the administration to do something about that. Is there anything in the works to find alternative housing that you're aware of, or funding, or?
No one has talked to me about it, so no, I'm not aware of anything.
Okay, we will let you know as soon as we know when the emergency here, we are seeking emergency relief. We will let you know when that hearing is scheduled and keep you posted. Thank you very much for attending.
Thank you.